Jim Branscombe here for the Cinematic Void Vlog. So I haven't had a chance to do a big recap episode in a while, so there's a lot of things I gotta talk about. You know, Beyond Fest just wrapped up, plus all the shows I did in August and September, and the really cool HELLRAISER double feature I did back in September. So why don't we start with the most recent thing, which is Beyond Fest. I had a couple shows that I presented within the festival. The first one was Birdemic 3 Sea Eagle. This was the Los Angeles premiere and featured director James Nguyen, as well as several of the cast in person, and it was presented by our friends at Severn Films. Also, I got the absolute privilege to present the West Coast premiere of Dario Argento, the legend, the horror legend's brand new film, Dark Glasses.
I love Dario Argento. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. And it is amazing that he's still around and still making nasty, mean fucking movies at his age. And this is no exception. So, I don't want to spoil anything, I don't want to say anything, let's just appreciate it, because like, people of his era are not going to be around for much longer. So let's cherish the fact that we can see a new Dario Argento movie in 2022.
And lastly, I also presented a special screening of Mike Cuenca's Like a Dirty French Novel, which has some giallo vibes. It was made during the pandemic. It's kind of a weird, I'd say if Rich Linklater decided to make a giallo or Dario Argento decided to make Slacker, that's kind of what Like a Dirty French Novel is. We also had some surprise guests show up during the Q&A. Speaking of Beyond Fest, before the actual festival, like a couple weeks beforehand, I got to co-present with them a special double feature of HELLRAISER and Hellbound, HELLRAISER 2 in glorious 35mm.
Tear your soul apart.
This HELLRAISER 2 print's been on a little bit of a print tour around the Rep Cinema circuit, and we had the absolute privilege of being able to screen it. And as an added bonus, we had screenwriter Peter Atkins, who wrote Hellbound, as well as HELLRAISER 3 and 4, show up to do a little introduction Q&A.
Now, when you're working on the script, obviously you had the first movie, you had the short story and all that. Like, how much was it, did you talk to Clive about like which direction you should go, or were you given the freedom to take this wherever you wanted, at least story-wise?
A bit of both. Because we'd had the history in theatre, a collaborative history, it was very. I got him for one night, so so I went round to. Was he living in? Yeah, we were both still in Crouch End, I think. Anyway, I went round. He said, "Come over. I've got a bottle." So we opened a bottle of vodka, and we jammed out a story. And then the bottle was empty. And then I went home and remembered enough of it the next morning to write, to write an 8-page treatment, which we showed to Chris Figg. And Chris said, "This is drunken bullshit. What are you..." No. Chris had a couple of smart notes, because he always does. And then he said, "Okay, I'll put you in a hotel. Can you get me a draft in 3 weeks?"
Now, I said this is going to be a very big kind of screening recap because I really haven't had time to do one of these. So we're going to go all the way back to August for a really cool series I got to put on at the Lost Fields 3, which was 60s Shockers, which were all black and white horror movies from the 60s. I kicked things off with probably, I'd say, maybe my all-time favorite movie, Seconds, directed by John Frankenheimer and starring Rock Hudson. Now, the first time we tried to show it, we had some technical issues, as in the 35mm print didn't show up on time, our backup DCP glitched, and then the backup Blu-ray also glitched. So it was a weird bit of circumstances, but about a week later, we did a makeup screening, so then I got to show Seconds in glorious 35mm. And seeing it with a crowd, especially when they moved it to like a Sunday afternoon, it's not really a Sunday afternoon movie, kind of bummed people out, but that's what Seconds does. It's an amazing film. If you've never seen it, there's a Blu-ray in the Criterion Collection, and I'm sure it's streaming somewhere, so check it out if you haven't seen Seconds yet. Following up Seconds, I got to show Ingmar Bergman's Hour of the Wolf, which is another movie that's part of the Criterion Collection, if that's what you're into. It's a really creepy, really effective, really scary horror movie, And, you know, Bergman made some depressing movies, made some dark movies, but this is kind of the only time he really went full-on horror. The following week, I got the opportunity to show a movie that has been very instrumental in me getting into film and cinematic void in general, which was George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. We showed our original 35mm print, and we had a special zombie method acting contest hosted by friend of the void, Deanna Rooney, playing a character. I can't remember the name we came up with because we literally came up with it like 20 seconds before we went on stage, but this contest was absolutely hilarious. It was a complete train wreck. I'm surprised people didn't walk out, but they stayed and they had a good time.
You seem like you got acting chops, so I'm going to be a little more challenging for you.
It's already.
All right, you're going to be Shrek from Shrek 2 as a zombie. And it has to be Shrek 2, not 1, not 3, 2.
In light of a sequel, we have to think about self-revelation.
Action!
And the most amazing thing about showing Night of the Living Dead at the screening is that 90% of the audience had not seen the film yet. So I'm not going to say anything because you might not have seen the movie yet, but when the ending hit, it was like the ultimate gut punch, and it's like as close as I think to seeing it originally in 1968 with the audience. Just people were mind blown. And to close out the 60 Shocker series, I ended with one of the, I'd say the kookiest of these black and white horror movies, which is Jack Hill's Spider Baby.
It's a fun movie. If you like Rob Zombie movies, you will definitely see where Rob Zombie got some of his aesthetic from. Maybe not visually, but kind of like how the characters act and all that. And plus Sid Haig, that's the commonality. Get it up for Sid.
Closing out August, I did a special advanced screening of James Greer's Mirror Moves. Now this was billed as kind of a experiment in psychological dread. James Greer, if you don't know, is a published author, and he was also in the band Guided by Voices, but probably more important for those of you who've been following Cinematic Void over the years, he was in the band Detective, who wrote the song Astros, which I've used for the Cinematic Void intro video since the beginning. After the film, James was in the house to do a Q&A along with actor Beth Lissick.
I like the parts too, talking about the reenactment stuff, because I love that true crime stuff where it's, I've always wanted, that's the acting job I always wanted, is just like to be the reenactment person on a murder show. We were like talking, you know, just doing the thing that the lady did, like taking off her wedding ring in the sink, and I'm like, oh, we have that, and it's just in the film. So
yeah, there were certain things that we did that were deliberately, you know, sort of like not parodying per se, but like doing the things that they do in a sort of murder reenactment.
All you were missing was Robert Stack showing up at any given point.
That's, you know, we made the call, but, you know,
it's kind of dead.
Sadly, underground, you know. This is the way I like to put it. But
with the August lineup done, we moved over to September, where I did a series that was kind of near and dear to my heart, or my childhood I should say, called Summer's End, which I basically programmed a bunch of kind of comedy 80s centric movies that I saw on HBO as a kid. Up first, I showed One Crazy Summer, and had the absolute privilege of having Curtis Armstrong, Joel Murray, and animation supervisor Bill Kopp in person for a Q&A.
I love this movie, I really do, and seeing it again and realizing, on the big screen especially, but seeing how much animation there is in it, and nothing was, I mean, there's nothing like that. I mean, really, then or now.
Well, we were trying to do it like, you know, our big influences were like Zap Comics, Underground Comics, Arcrum, that kind of stuff. And we animated everything on one. So there really were 24 drawings per second. Wow. That's why it's so smooth and squishy, you know. Yeah.
It's just, I think it's really...
Well, we didn't have anything else to do, so...
You weren't invited to the bar.
No, we brought our own.
The next week, I followed that up with showing Summer School, which was probably the movie I saw the most on HBO as a kid. I think anytime Summer School was ever on HBO, I watched it no matter what. No matter where it was in the movie, it could be halfway through, right at the beginning, towards the end, I would always watch Summer School. And even cooler for this screening, had actors Dean Cameron and Richard Stephen Horvitz in person for another phenomenal Q&A.
What was it like for both of you to work with Carl Reiner? Because he's absolute comedy legend. And...
Well, when he was sober, it was fantastic. He spoiled us.
We were spoiled. It was
my first movie.
Our first major role, our first major motion picture. So Carl had a family, and he wanted to start work at 9 a.m. and be done by 6 p.m. to be home for dinner. And other than the party scene, I think that's the only.
There was a couple night
shoots.
Because there was stuff that was cut out in one of the scenes.
That's right.
It was a night.
So it was wonderful, and Carl knew that he was working with a bunch of young actors.
Cocky
young actors who had tons of ideas. We had tons of ideas constantly. Well, what if we did this? And he let us do mostly everything. We shot how much was it? 6 hours over the original time.
Yeah, the original script was every one of the students had a lot of stuff to do, and they sort of.
Yeah, in fact, Carl was notorious because we went to the first screening at Paramount. It was a press junket, and Carl took me aside and he said, "Listen, the movie was 4 hours overtime, and a lot of stuff ended up on the cutting room floor, and it's not you. It's just that if it didn't add to the story, we had to cut it out and move it on because he believed that no comedy should be longer than an hour and a half."
Following summer school, we just went to school as we showed just one of the guys. This was probably outside of summer school the movie I saw the most on HBO. So if I saw Summer School about 6 million times on HBO, probably saw this about 5.8 million times or something like that. And it was a blast to watch this movie with the crowd. It played really well, the print was beautiful, and it was a great night for everyone that showed up. Then, to close out Summer's End, I showed what I think is could possibly be really the best movie out of the 80s, which is The Legend of Billie Jean. Actor Caroline Williams, who's best known as Stretch from Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, showed up and did an introduction because this was one of her earliest roles, and in fact, her audition for this movie helped her land an audition for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
So in the audition, and in Texas especially, I tended to take lots of physical risks. They were bringing me in for lots of physical roles. So I'm sitting in my little chair, and they were letting us read with a young man to be the guy in the truck. So we're reading in pairs, and we're sitting in the chairs, and it's rocking around. The action says, "Oh my God, the truck's rocking around, it's about to turn over." And so I went ahead and I turned my chair over. And the guy who was reading with me just kind of sat there and just watched the rest of everything I did. But it is how I got hired. The following year, I did once again a very physical audition for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
So that recaps everything we've screened since August of 2020 through beginning of October, which was Beyond Fest. So if you enjoy this vlog, make sure you're subscribed to the Cinematic Void YouTube channel, and thanks for watching.
Alright, everyone take a pretzel. These pretzels are sold at our concession stand. They're actually delicious. I wish I was having one, but I don't need tickets to this. No mustard? No mustard. And no beverages. Oh, so you. Bad bread. You thought this was going to be easy, didn't you? Yeah, there's no easy in winning Shatner commentator. So Chris and I are going to count down for 3. When we say go, eat your pretzel. The fastest one wins. And if any falls on the floor, you pick that shit up and put it in your mouth. No cheating. That's fair. Yeah. All right. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go! Eat! Alright, we're getting good here. We're getting good. This guy's got style. This guy's got journey. This guy's ready his life. This guy's savoring it. This guy's going. He's going. What do you say for his showrunning Shatner? Look, Shatner would finish this pretzel by now. Do it for Shatner, goddammit.